Welcome to Gnana Taranga, NEET and CET program organized by Department of Pre-University Education, Karnataka. My name is Pallavi, lecturer in biology. Today we are going to discuss about two topics, and the first topic is excretion and elimination of nitrogenous waste. So in our body, ammonia, urea, uric acid, carbon dioxide, water and some ions gets accumulated by metabolic activities or by ingestion of excess food. These substances has to be eliminated. Thus, the elimination of these substances is called excretion. Ammonia, urea and uric acid are considered as the major nitrogenous waste. Based on the type of the nitrogenous waste eliminated, animals are classified into three types: ammonotelic, ureotelic and urecotylic. Ammonotelic animals eliminate ammonia, which is highly toxic and readily soluble in water, which needs excess of water for its elimination. Example: aquatic amphibians and their larvae, aquatic insects and bony fishes. Eureotelic animals: the animals which eliminate less toxic, less soluble urea as a nitrogenous waste. Example: mammals, terrestrial amphibians, etc. Urecotylic animals which eliminate uric acid as nitrogenous waste, which is least toxic and least soluble in water, and the organisms, to conserve the water in their body, eliminate the uric acid in the form of pellet or paste, are called urecotylic animals. Example: reptiles, birds and other insects. Usually there are different types of structures present in the organisms for the elimination of the nitrogenous waste. For example, contractile vacuole in protists, which helps in osmoregulation, and the protonephridia and flame cells in platyhelminthes, cephalocardites and the other organisms, where it helps in removal of nitrogenous waste and also osmoregulation. And in usually higher organisms or vertebrates, kidney plays the major role in removal of nitrogenous waste. Whereas when we take the arthropods, in example cockroach, Malpighian tubules help in the removal of nitrogenous waste and also the maintenance of osmoregulation. And in some crustaceans, the antennal glands, which are also called as green glands, plays a major role in removal of nitrogenous waste and also play a role of maintaining osmotic regulation. We will today discuss about the human excretory system. It consists of a pair of kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder and a urethra. The kidney are reddish brown, bean shaped structure present on either side of the vertebral column, starting from last thoracic vertebra to the third lumbar vertebra. Each kidney anatomically is divided into outer cortex and inner medulla. The inner medulla has the renal pyramids, which are having an accumulation of structural and functional units of the excretion called nephron. Cortex present in between the renal pyramids, we call it as renal column, or also known as column of Burtney. The structural and functional units of the kidney are called nephron. 1 million nephron will be present in each kidney, and it is divided into two parts: glomerulus and renal tubules. The renal tubules has the first part, which is bilayered and cup-like structure called Bowman's capsule. Its inner layer is lined by a specialized squamous epithelial cells called podocytes, which have the microspores, or we call it as slit pores, for the filtration. Bowman's capsule with the glomerulus, which is a network of afferent and efferent arteriole. Together we call it as Malpighian tubule. Then the Bowman's capsule continues as PCT, which is proximal convoluted tubule, which is highly coiled, and then hairpin shaped loop of Henle with descending and the ascending limbs, and another convoluted tubule called distal convoluted tubule and collecting tubule. Bowman's capsule, proximal convoluted tubule and distal convoluted tubule will be present in the cortex region, whereas the loop of Henle will be present in the medulla. Usually, the medulla will be short and present superficially in many of the organisms, and that type of nephron are called corticular nephrons. Whereas in few organisms, loop of Henle will be long and extended till the medullary interstitium, which we call it as juxtamedullary nephron. Then the nephron helps in urine formation in human. The urine formation in the human undergoes 3 steps, namely glomerular filtration, reabsorption and secretion in the different parts of the tubules. Glomerular filtration occurs in the Bowman's capsule by the pressure exerted by the glomerulus when the blood moves from the wide afferent arteriole to narrow efferent arteriole. The pressure which exerted on them leads to the filtration of both essential and non-essential substances through the slit pores of the podocytes into the lumen of the Bowman's capsule. Hence, it is called as ultrafiltration. Then, thus the filtrate formed in a minute is called glomerular filtrate rate. It will be approximately 125 ml per minute. It forms about 180 liters per day. This glomerular filtrate rate is affected by a special apparatus formed in the junction of the afferent arteriole and the DCT, which will secrete an hormone called renin, helps in regulation of the glomerular filtrate rate. Then, since there will be a formation of 180 liter per day, but usually a person will eliminate 1.5 liter of urine per day. So, the next step is reabsorption, which will leads to the reabsorption of the essential substance in the different parts of the tubules. First, the reabsorption takes place in the proximal convoluted tubule, where 70 to 80% of the water and electrolytes, ions, everything will be reabsorbed into the body fluids by an selective reabsorption process. Further, the filtrate moves into the loop of Henle. Here, there will be no much reabsorption process taking place, but the concentration will be maintained and the osmolality will be maintained in the movement of the filtrate. Since the descending limb will be permeable to water and impermeable to the salts and the ions, whereas the ascending limb will be permeable to the salts and ions and impermeable to the water. Then, when the filtrate moves to the distal convoluted tubule, it undergoes conditioned reabsorption by the action of antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin. Further, it will move to the collecting tubule, which is a large tubule present both in the cortex and the renal pyramid. Thus, there will be a formation of concentrated urine, where it will be 99% of the essential substances are reabsorbed into the body fluids. When you come to the functions of the tubules, proximal convoluted tubule leads to maximum reabsorption. Then Henle's loop helps in maintenance of the concentration, and distal convoluted tubule helps in conditioned reabsorption and maintenance of the ionic balance, and collecting duct leads to complete reabsorption of the water and formation of highly concentrated urine. This concentration of the filtrate can be maintained by a special process which we call it as counter current mechanism. The movement of any body fluids anti-parallel to each other in two limbs, we call it as counter current mechanism. As we see, we can see the loop of Henle which is U-shaped, and where the filtrate moves from the PCT towards the downwards, and opposite to that in the ascending limb the filtrate moves upwards. That forms counter current. On this the tubules, we can find an afferent arteriole which will be coiled around the tubules. We call it as peritubular capillaries. The peritubular capillaries, fine branches are found around the loop of Henle like in U shape. We call it as vasa recta. Vasa recta forms the U-shaped structure on the loop of Henle, will be present like a U shape on the loop of Henle. So when we see this, you can see here the arrangement of the vasa recta with the loop of Henle, where the descending limb will come from the upside, and then it will coil around the loop of Henle and it goes upwards. So this will be the ascending limb of the vasa recta, whereas the other side will be the descending limb of the vasa recta. When we separate them on other side, we can see here where the loop of Henle, the descending limb, and the loop of Henle is ascending limb. The movement of the filtrate shows the counter current mechanism, whereas when we see the movement of blood in the descending limb of the vasa recta and the ascending limb of the vasa recta also forms the counter current mechanism. Thus, the vasa recta and the loop of Henle helps mainly in the formation of counter current mechanism with the exchange of NaCl and a light concentration of the urea. When the filtrate moves upwards in the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, since which is permeable to the salts and the ions, the NaCl will move into the vasa recta, whereas it comes down in the collecting tubule. Some amount of urea is exchanged with the medullary interstitium of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, which will join again at the collecting tubule and forms the concentration. Whereas the movement of NaCl to the vasa recta, that will again come into the body fluids through the descending limb of the loop of Henle. Thus, by the exchange of NaCl and the urea, there will be an elimination of concentrated urine. That mechanism we call it as counter current mechanism. Next, kidney functions can be regulated by antidiuretic hormone by the hypothalamus secretion. When there will be a decrease in the body fluid volume, blood volume and the ions volume, the pituitary gland releases antidiuretic hormone, which is also called as vasopressin, which leads to constriction of the blood vessels and thereby increases the blood pressure. That will increase the glomerular filtrate rate. Then next, it is juxtaglomerular apparatus, which are formed in the kidney at the junction of contact of the afferent arteriole with the DCT, which will give rise to formation of an apparatus which we call it as juxtaglomerular apparatus, which has juxtaglomerular cells. These juxtaglomerular cells secretes an hormone called renin. This hormone helps in conversion of Angiotensinogen, which is present in the blood, to convert into angiotensin 1 and then further to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 acts as a strong vasoconstrictor, and thus it increases the glomerular filtrate rate. And next, the heart, which also helps in the formation, the regulation of the kidney functions. When the glomerular filtrate rate increases by the angiotensinogen mechanism, the pressure will be increased for the walls of the auricles for pumping the more and more blood, during which the sensitive cells present in the wall of the atria will secrete an atrial natriuretic factor, which is an vasodilator. Thus, angiotensin mechanism and the atrial natriuretic factor both check against each other, and thus they will regulate the kidney functions. Next is mixturation. The process of elimination of the urine, we call it as mixturation. It is controlled by the receptor cells which are present in the urinary bladder. When the urine starts getting filled in the urinary bladder stretches and makes stretch receptors. These stretch receptors will send the message to central nervous system, from where the processed message is carried through the motor neuron on the smooth muscles of the urinary bladder to contract and urethra to relax, thus releasing the urine. Next, other organs which are responsible for the excretion are lungs, liver and skin. Lungs, through which carbon dioxide is eliminated. The liver, with the association of the angiotensinogen mechanism, which will act on the growth factor which are formed in the liver, and then by sweat and the sebum are eliminated through the skin. And then disorders of the excretory system. So uremia, where there will be a kidney will be failed to filter the urine, and then there will be a presence of urea in blood, is called as uremia. So for this, the hemodialysis will be used to filter the nitrogenous waste and eliminate. Renal failure is nothing but kidney failure, so which can be corrected by kidney transplantation. Renal calculi. Due to the excess of calcium, there can be a crystals formed and which will block the tubules and thereby the filtration. We call it as renal calculi, or we call it as kidney stones. The glomerular nephritis. Inflammation of glomerulus, which will lead to improper formation of glomerular filtrate. We call it as glomerular nephritis. Next, we will move to the questions. First question, ureotelism refers to removal of ammonia from the body, removal of urea from the body, removal of uric acid from the body, removal of cell products from the body. As we know, removal of ammonia from the body is called ammonotelism, and removal of urea from the body is the correct answer, and removal of uric acid from the body, we call it as urecotelism. Next question, urecotelism is found in mammals and birds, fishes and freshwater protozoans, birds, reptiles and insects, frogs and toads. Mammals and birds, mammals ureotelic, birds urecotylic. When you come to second option, fishes are ammonotelic, freshwater protozoans are also ammonotelic, whereas we come to the third option, birds urecotylic, reptiles urecotylic and insects are also urecotylics. So, the correct option is C. Next question, nitrogenous waste products are eliminated mainly as urea in tadpole and ammonia in adult frog, ammonia in tadpole and urea in adult frog, urea in both tadpole and adult frog, urea in tadpole and uric acid in adult frog. The correct answer, as we already discussed, is ammonia in tadpole and urea in adult frog, option B. Next question, which is the organ of osmoregulation in protozoan like amoeba and paramecium? Contractile vacuole, sap vacuole, gas vacuole and food vacuoles. So, you can see here, these are the protists. Amoeba comes under the protist. As we have discussed, the contractile vacuole plays a role of the osmoregulation and elimination of nitrogenous waste, where is the answer. Whereas, sap vacuoles are seen in the plants majorly, where everything is stored. Waste are the secretions which are necessary, everything will be stored in the sap vacuole. When you come to the gas vacuoles, again these are present in the protists, okay, which helps in the buoyancy, floating. Then food vacuoles, which acts as a temporary stomachs in the protists for storing the food material. So, answer is contractile vacuole. Next question, the basic functional unit of human kidney is nephron, pyramid, nephridia, enlist loop. As we have discussed, it is nephron. Next question, figure shows nephron with structures labeled A, B and C. Select the option correctly identifies them. So, we can see here A is collecting tubule, B is proximal convoluted tubule and C is distal convoluted tubule, and as per that the option A is correct. Next, which one of the following is not a part of renal pyramid? Convoluted tubules, collecting duct, loop of Henle, peritubular capillaries. Convoluted tubules and collecting ducts, loop of Henle, peritubular capillaries. Answer is convoluted tubules, because the convoluted tubules will be present in the cortex region, other parts will be present in the renal pyramids. Next question, presence of brush border is the characteristic of. So, when we take the structure of Bowman's capsule, so the first part after the Bowman's capsule is PCT, proximal convoluted tubule, where we have seen in the explanation that 70 to 80% of reabsorption occurs. This is lined by the simple brush bordered cuboidal epithelial cells, which increases the absorptive area. So, the proximal convoluted tubule will be having brush bordered cuboidal epithelial cells. Next question, the ability of the vertebrates to produce concentrated urine usually depends upon area of Bowman's capsule epithelium, length of Henle's loop, length of the proximal convoluted tubule, capillary network forming glomerulus. As we have seen, two types of nephrons, that is cortical nephrons and juxtamedullary nephrons. Juxtamedullary nephrons has the largest loop or long loop of Henle till which extends till the interstitium of the medulla, renal medulla, because as much as the length of the loop of Henle increases, that much more concentrated urine will be formed. Thus, length of enleast loop is responsible for the concentration of urine. Option B. 10th question. Medullary gradient is mainly developed by. When we studied about the loop of Henle and the vasa recta, which helps in the counter current mechanism, the movement of filtrate in the loop of Henle and the movement of blood in the vasa recta forms the counter current mechanism. When we take the ascending limb of the loop of Henle and the collecting tubule, where there will be movement of the filtrate will be towards the downwards, which also forms the counter current mechanism. There will be a exchange of small amount of urea between the ascending limb and the collecting tubule, whereas there will be exchange of some amount of NaCl with the ascending limb of loop of Henle and the descending limb of the vasa recta, which also forms the counter current mechanism, are responsible for maintenance of the gradient. That is the osmolarity starting from the 300 milliosmol per liter to the 1200 milliosmol per liter. So, the answer is A, NaCl and urea. Reabsorption of useful substances from glomerular filtrate occurs in collecting duct, loop of Henle, proximal convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule. So, maximum reabsorption of the useful substances occurs in proximal convoluted tubule, since they are also lined with the brush bordered cuboidal epithelium. Next question. Which one of the following statement in regard to the excretion by the human kidney is correct? First option, descending limb of loop of Henle is impermeable to water. So, then distal convoluted tubule is incapable of reabsorbing HCO3. Next, nearly 99% of the glomerular filtrate is reabsorbed by the renal tubules. Ascending limb of loop of Henle is impermeable to electrolytes. So, descending limb of loop of Henle is permeable to water. So, option A is wrong. Then distal convoluted tubule is incapable of reabsorbing HCO3 is wrong, since it is capable. Then as we have seen, the glomerular filtrate rate per minute is 125 ml, and whereas when we take the amount of the urine eliminated per day is 1.5 liters per day. So, for that the reabsorption of 99% of filtrate is necessary, which occurs in all the parts, that is PCT, Henle's loop and the DCT. That is why option C is correct. Nearly 99% of the glomerular filtrate is reabsorbed by the renal tubules. Next question. Which one of the following correctly explains the function of a specific part of a human nephron? Henle's loop, most reabsorption of the major substances from the glomerular filtrate. It is wrong, since the Henle's loop least amount of reabsorption takes place and maximum its support in maintenance of concentration and osmolarity. Distal convoluted tubule, reabsorption of ions into the surrounding blood capillaries is also wrong. Afferent arteriole, which carries the blood away from the glomerulus towards the renal vein, it's wrong, since it carries the blood into the glomerulus, and the correct answer is podocytes. Create minute spaces, which we call it as slit pores, for the filtration of blood into Bowman's capsule, and thus it forms the primary filtrate. Next question. The maximum amount of electrolytes and water that is 70 to 80% from the glomerular filtrate is reabsorbed in which part of the nephron? Ascending limb of loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, proximal convoluted tubule, descending limb of loop of Henle. By now you would have understand the correct answer is the proximal convoluted tubule, which has the more absorptive area by the brush bordered cuboidal epithelium. Next question. Urine is formed by the process of, it undergoes 3 steps, one in the Malpighian corpuscle, followed by in the tubules, and then in the tubules only the secretion, correct. So then the option will be like glomerular filtration, which is also called as ultrafiltration, that is correct. So then next will be the reabsorption of the essential substances, and then third will be secretion. So option C is correct, ultrafiltration, reabsorption, and then the secretion to maintain the ionic balance. Next question. Angiotensinogen is a protein produced and secreted by. We have studied in the mechanism of regulation of kidney function, where the heart, kidney, hypothalamus plays a major role. In that we have studied that there is a special apparatus formed at the site of the distal convoluted tubule coming in contact with the afferent arteriole, forming a specialized cells. We call it as juxtaglomerular cells, and this full set we call it as juxtaglomerular apparatus. When there will be a fall in the glomerular filtrate rate, this juxtaglomerular cells gets activated and they secrete the hormone which we call it as renin. This renin, which helps in the conversion of angiotensinogen protein, which is present in the blood, into angiotensinogen 1 and angiotensinogen 2. So the correct answer is juxtaglomerular cells, D. Next question. What will happen if the stretch receptors of the urinary bladder wall are totally removed? As we have studied the process of mixturation, a process of elimination, or we can use the term, we call it as release of urine from the urinary bladder, is called mixturation, which is controlled by the central nervous system. When the urine starts filling in the urinary bladder, it starts getting stretching. When it stretches, the lining of the urinary bladder, there will be a presence of receptor cells, which sends the message for the central nervous system, and thus the message will be brought back by the motor neuron to the wall of the urinary bladder to undergo the contraction, and the smooth muscle present in the urethra to undergo the relaxation, thus releasing the urine. If there are no receptor cells itself, then whenever the urine gets filled, there will be no formation of stretch receptors, nor the information sent to the central nervous system, not the information back to the urinary bladder. Thus, there will be no mixturation. So, option D. Next, a person who is on a long hunger strike and is surviving only on water will have more sodium in his urine, less amino acids in his urine, more glucose in his blood, less urea in his urine. Since, as we discussed in the beginning itself, the ammonia, urea, uric acid, carbon dioxide, water, other some ions and salts get accumulated in our body by metabolic activity and excess of ingestion of food. which will be formed into an nitrogenous waste. When a person is under the hunger strike, there will be no metabolic activity nor the excess of ingestion, so there will be less nitrogenous waste formed, or there will be no nitrogenous waste formed. Thus, the answer will be less urea in his urine. Next question. Function of kidney is efficiently monitored and regulated by hormonal feedback mechanism involving hypothalamus, Juxtaglomerular Apparatus, JGA, heart, all of the above. So, this we have already discussed. I will repeat. So, from the hypothalamus, when there will be a drop in the body fluid volumes, it will release an hypothalamic hormone which we call it as ADH, which is an vasoconstrictor, which will lead to increase in blood pressure, thereby increasing the fluid volume. Whereas when you come to the juxtaglomerular apparatus, so it is formed at the junction of the attachment of the distal convoluted tubules with the afferent arteriole, and thus giving rise to a juxtaglomerular cells by angiotensinogen mechanism. Then when you come to the heart, it is by the increased the glomerular filtrate rate by angiotensinogen mechanism. Gives the pressure on the wall of the arteries, which will lead to secretion of ANF, atrionatriuretic factor, which will check the angiotensinogen mechanism, which will be a feedback mechanism. As there will be a more glomerular filtrate, then there will be a ANF, and when there will be a decrease, then the JGA cells will activate to secrete the renin. So, they both act against each other. Thus, all the three. So, option D, all of the above. Next question. In mixturation, we have discussed. So, during the mixturation, urinary bladder contracts and urethra relaxes by the message brought by the motor neuron from the central nervous system, by the message which is received to the central nervous system by the stretch receptors. We call it as mixturation. So, here the correct option is urethra relaxes. Next question. Condition which results in failure of kidney is known as. So, when we have discussed about the disorders, we have studied that uremia. So, where it can be corrected by hemodialysis. So, that is excess of urine in blood. Excess of urine in blood, we call it as uremia. So, which has to be removed by the process called hemodialysis. Next is anuria. A always refers to absent, nuria, urea. So, that is anuria, which means kidney failure. When the kidney is failed, there will be no formation of urea. Then diuria, excess of urine formation. We call it as diuria. Then when you come to hematuria, is blood in urine. When there are blood clots are present, heme means blood in urea, that is called as hematuria. Now, according to the question, condition which results in failure of kidney is known as option B, anuria. There will be no formation of urine which can be replaced by kidney transplantation. Next question. Given below are assertion and reason. Point out if both are true when reason being correct explanation. Assertion. When the urine moves through the descending limb, it becomes hypertonic, and as it moves through the ascending limb of Henle's loop, it becomes hypotonic. Reason. The descending limb is permeable to sodium ions while the ascending limb is impermeable to sodium ions. So first we will discuss about the assertion. When we take the loop of Henle, so this is the descending limb and this will be the ascending limb. When the filtrate moves in the descending limb, concentration increases. That means it will from the 300 milliosmol per liter increases to 1200 milliosmol per liter in the inner interstitium. That means it will, the concentration increases, which will give rise to formation of hypertonic. That is correct. And when it passes through the ascending limb, since it is permeable to salts and ions, the salts and ions will be lost. It is impermeable to water, then the water content increases in the filtrate, because of which it will become hypotonic. So the assertion is correct. When you come to reason, the descending limb is permeable to sodium ions. No, the descending limb is actually permeable to water and impermeable to salts and ions, because of which during the movement of the filtrate from the up to the down, it will become hypertonic. And while the ascending limb is impermeable to sodium ions, but it is the permeable to sodium ions. Since the option will be assertion is true. Assertion is true, whereas the reason is wrong. Next question. Given below are assertion and reason. Point out if both are true with reason being correct explanation. Assertion. Many bony fishes, aquatic amphibians and aquatic insects are ammonotelic. Reason. Elimination of ammonia requires large amount of water. So options, both are true with reason being correct explanation. Both are true but reason is not the correct explanation. Assertion is true but reason is wrong. Both are wrong. We will go with the assertion. So many bony fishes, usually freshwater fishes they will be, then aquatic amphibians, larvae of amphibia etc., and aquatic insects are ammonotelic. That is correct. Next, reason. Elimination of ammonia requires large amount of water. Since ammonia is a highly toxic substance and it is readily soluble in water, it needs large amount of water for elimination of ammonia. So the reason is also correct. That's why the answer will be both are true with reason being correct explanation. And these will be usually aquatic organisms where they have an excess of water. First list is protonephridia, nephridia, malphigian tubules. Antennal glands are green glands, the structures for excretion. When you see the examples, Amphiaxis, earthworm, flatworms and prawns. Protonephridia or we also call flame cells, are the structures for the removal of nitrogenous waste in platyhelminths and rotifers and cephalochordates. Amphioxus is an example of cephalochordate. So that is correct. Next, when we come to the nephridia, nephridia are the excretory structures in the phylum Annelida. So earthworm belongs to Annelida, so that option is correct. When we come to Malpighian tubules, they are the blind tubules, 100 to 150 tubules which will be present in the alimentary canal. They will be present in the alimentary canal of cockroach at the junction of midgut and the hindgut, the region called ileum. So these are all the excretory structures in reptiles, birds, and usually which eliminate uric acid, and insects. Usually Malpighian tubules are found in the insects. Reptiles and birds also have the same type of nitrogenous waste but with the kidney. So these are found in the insects, not in the flatworms. So this option is incorrect. When you come to antennal glands or green glands, so these are the excretory structures of crustaceans, for example prawns. So correct option is Malpighian tubules, which are the excretory structures of cockroach, or we can tell it as insects, not the flatworms. Next, now we will go to second topic, chemical coordination and integration. As we know, in our body, the control and coordination is by nervous system, where there is a point-to-point rapid coordination in organs, but it is very fast and short-lived. For any physiological changes to happen, there should be a integration with the individual cells, where the nerve endings fail to reach the individual cells. Hence, that will be regulated by the endocrine system. So endocrine system includes endocrine glands and hormones. A hormone is secreted by the endocrine glands, which are ductless glands, and it can be classically defined as a hormone is a chemical produced by endocrine glands and released into the blood and transported to a distantly located target organ, whereas the scientific definition goes as hormones are non-nutrient chemicals which act as intercellular messengers and are produced in trace amounts. When you come to human endocrine system, the major endocrine glands are the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, pineal gland, thyroid, parathyroid, thymus, adrenal, pancreas, testes, and ovary. When we take each gland, we will start with the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is a part of the brain which is having lining of neurosecretory cells. These neurosecretory cells are called as nuclei. This nuclei helps in secretion of hormones. Hormones are of two types in hypothalamus. They are releasing hormone and inhibiting hormone. Example for releasing hormone is gonadotropic releasing hormone, and inhibiting hormone somatostatin. GnRH or a gonadotropic releasing hormone initiates the release of gonadotrophins, whereas somatostatin inhibits the release of growth hormone. Next is pituitary gland. As we see here, pituitary gland is found attached to the hypothalamus by a stalk called infundibulum, and it is present in the region called sella turcica in the skull, and it is of size of a pea. It is divided into two parts as adenophysis and neurophysis. Adenophysis consists of lobes like pars distalis and pars intermedia. Pars distalis is also called anterior pituitary, whereas pars intermedia is the middle pituitary. So, anterior pituitary secretes 6 hormones, whereas pars intermedia secretes only 1 hormone. The 6 hormones are growth hormone or somatotropic hormone, prolactin, then thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and gonadotropins like LH and FSH. Gonadotropins, LH and FSH. Whereas when we take the function of each hormone, starting from the first hormone called growth hormone or somatotropic hormone. It is called as somatotropic since in our body we have two types of cells, namely somatic cells and the germ cells. This hormone acts on somatic cells, hence it is also known as somatotropic hormone. So, somatotropic hormone or growth hormone helps in regulation of the growth. If this hormone is secreted in more amount in the child, then it will lead to gigantism, where if it is secreted less, it will lead to dwarfism. Whereas in the adult, if it is secreted in more, that will lead to acromegaly. So, when we take the next hormone, that is prolactin hormone, the prolactin hormone helps in growth of mammary glands and secretion of milk in the mammary glands. And when we take the thyroid stimulating hormone, it helps in secretion of thyroxine from the thyroid gland. Then adrenocorticotropic hormone, which stimulates the secretion of glucocorticoids from the cortex of the Adrenal Gland. Then LH and FSH are the gonadotrophins, which acts on the ovary in the female and testis in males. When you come to the hormones secreted by the pars intermedia, that is melanocyte stimulating hormone, it helps in the maintenance of the melanin pigment secretion. Then the next part of the pituitary gland is neurohypophysis, which is also known as posterior pituitary or pars nervosa. This particular posterior pituitary doesn't secrete any hormone, but it stores the two hormones and releases them, which are synthesized in the hypothalamus. They are oxytocin and ADH. Oxytocin is known as delivery hormone, which helps in the process of parturition or the delivery, and also helps in ejaculation of the milk from the mammary glands by acting on the smooth muscles and leads to contraction. ADH, which is also called as vasopressin, is an active vasoconstrictor. When we go to the next gland, that is the pineal gland. Pineal gland is a gland which helps in secretion of the melanin pigment. So, and also it helps in the maintenance of our 24 hours circadian cycle. We call it as diurnal cycle of our body. And then next is thyroid gland. Thyroid glands are present on either side of the trachea. There are a pair of glands which are present on either side of the trachea, so which help in secretion of the hormones, which we call it as tetraiodothyronine, which is represented as T4, which means tetra, and then triiodothyronine, which is represented as T3. This tetraiodothyronine is also called as thyroxine, whereas triiodothyronine both helps in intercellular space. Usually when they are secreted from this gland, they will be stored in the intercellular space and then it will be released whenever it is necessary. The deficiency of the iodine leads to enlargement of this thyroid gland, and that we call it as goiter. We call it as goiter. The increased secretion will be seen due to the cancer of thyroid or nodules in the thyroid, which will lead to hyperthyroidism and which affects on the body physiology. The hypothyroidism, other than the goiter, it also lead to the stunted growth if it is occurs at the pregnancy. If the female at the time of the pregnancy couldn't able to secrete this hormone in the proper way, it will lead to a stunted growth, and the condition we call it as cretinism. That condition is called as cretinism. And then the next gland, parathyroid gland. As you can see here, the parathyroid glands are 4 in number, present on the basal side or the other side of the thyroid gland, 2 in each of the thyroid gland. So this parathyroid gland secretes an hormone which is called as parathyroid hormone, PTH, which helps in maintaining the calcium ion balance in the body, and hence it is called as hypercalcemic hormone. This helps in maintaining the calcium ions, and also if it helps in the secretion from the renal tubules, etc., and leads into the blood. And the next is thymus gland. Thymus gland, which is present just behind the aorta at the dorsal end of the heart, which majorly helps in providing immunity. It helps in providing immunity. So the immunity is usually provided by the lymphocytes. There are 2 types of lymphocytes, namely B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. This thymus helps in differentiation of T lymphocytes into different types of cells, and the immunity provided, we call it as cell mediated immunity, and also it helps in the secretion of the thymosin, the hormone which initiates the B lymphocytes to secrete the antibodies. And the next is adrenal gland. You can see the adrenal gland is present on the anterior end of the kidney, and it is anatomically differentiated into outer cortex and inner medulla. Medulla secretes hormone called adrenaline or noradrenaline, which are also called as epinephrine or norepinephrine, which increases the blood pressure, and these are secreted in more amount during the emergency conditions or under the person is when under the stress. Hence, this hormone is called as flight, fright, fight hormone or F3 hormones. Whereas when you come to the cortex region, cortex is made up of 3 layers, namely an outer zona reticularis, middle zona fasciculata, and inner then these all the 3 layers secretes an hormone called corticoids. The corticoids, the hyposecretion of these cortical hormones leads to a disease which we call it as Addison's disease, and also helps in carbohydrate metabolism regulation and water and electrolyte balance. And the next gland is pancreas. When you come to the pancreas, pancreas is known as heterocrine gland. Which means it has both exocrine part and the endocrine part. Exocrine part is called acinar cells, which secretes digestive juice, whereas endocrine part is called as islets of Langerhans and has alpha cells, beta cells and etc. Majorly alpha cells and the beta cells which maintain the body sugar level. Alpha cells secretes an hormone called glucagon and beta cells secretes insulin. Glucagon helps in the breakdown of the stored glycogen into sugar and increases the amount of sugar in the blood, hence it is called as hyperglycemic factor, whereas insulin helps in conversion of excess of sugar into glycogen which will be stored in the liver and reduces the amount of glucose in the blood, hence it is known as hypoglycemic factor. And the next is testis. Testis and the ovary are the gonads present respectively in male and the female. When we take the testis, it mainly acts as an organ to produce the gametes and also plays a role of endocrine gland. And the testis has two parts. The one which is called as seminiferous tubules, structural and functional units, helps in production of gametes, and then another part which is an endocrine part, we call it as Leydig cells, or these are also called as interstitial cells. These Leydig cells or interstitial cells helps in secretion of male hormones called androgens, majorly testosterone, which helps in growth of secondary sexual characters in males. Whereas when you come to the ovary, so ovary has developing follicles. This follicular cells secretes an hormone called estrogen, and the completely matured follicle, when it ruptures and gives rise to formation of a structure called corpus luteum, which will secrete progesterone. Estrogen helps in proliferation of or formation of endometrium, whereas progesterone helps in maintenance of endometrium for the pregnancy. And then when we move to the hormones which are secreted by the other organs, so that is liver, kidney, heart and gastrointestinal tract, also plays a major role in secretion of hormones. For example, when we take the hormones which are secreted in the liver, it is growth factor 1. When we take the hormones of kidney, as we have studied in the first session, that is about the peptide hormones by the juxtaglomerular cells, and then by the heart it is azionatriuretic factor called ANF, and then gastrointestinal tract, the hormones secreted are gastrin, secretin, cholecytokinin and gastric inhibitory peptide. The hormones based on their composition classified into 4 major types, namely peptide or polypeptide or protein hormones, example insulin, glucagon, pituitary hormone, hypothalamic hormones, etc. And steroid hormones, namely cortisol, testosterone, estradiol and progesterone, and iodothyronines, example thyroid hormones, and amino acid derivatives, namely epinephrine. These hormones act differently in different parts of our body, or directly with the nucleus or on the plasma membrane, based on their composition and the solubility. When we take, there are usually 2 types of hormones as a main content, that is protein and the steroid or the lipid. So when you see the proteins which are soluble in the water, so the these hormones which are soluble in the water will bind to the receptors which are present in the membrane. Thus, that receptors we call it as membrane bound receptors. This will form a complex by binding with the receptors, and that will give rise to an first response which we call it as response 1, which will generate the secondary messenger, usually cyclic AMP, and that will act on the cell's genome and gives rise to biochemical responses or the physiological responses. When you take the other type of hormone that we call it as a steroid hormone, which is insoluble in the water, it will be transported through the blood by a protein receptor till the target region. Once it comes near the plasma membrane, that receptor will dissociate and the hormone will be released, which directly enters inside the cell. Here it can bind to any of the receptors which is present outside the cytoplasm or maybe inside the nucleus. After binding to the receptor present inside, which we call it as cellular receptors. Receptors which are present inside the cell in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus, we call it as cellular receptors. That cellular receptors will form a complex with the hormone called receptor hormone complex, which will then bind to the particular site in the DNA and initiates transcription. By initiating the formation of mRNA, thus which will synthesize the proteins, thereby giving rise to the physiological changes. And then starting with the questions, which one of the following pairs of organs includes only the endocrine glands? Options: parathyroid and adrenal, pancreas and parathyroid, thymus and testis, adrenal and ovary. As you see here, parathyroid and adrenal are both are endocrine glands. When we come to the second option, parathyroid is a completely endocrine gland, whereas pancreas is an heterocrine gland, which has both endocrine and the exocrine part. When we come to the thymus and the testis, thymus is completely endocrine gland, whereas testis is as a duct through which the gametes are transferred, and the secondary function is it acts as endocrine. Then when you come to the adrenal and the ovary, so adrenal gland is a complete endocrine gland, whereas ovary is a gonad, again which has a ducts. So the answer is parathyroid and the adrenal gland. Next question, hormones are chemically known as proteins, fatty acid derivatives, steroids, all the above. As we have discussed, they are classified into 4 different types based on their chemical composition, where they have protein, fatty acid derivative, steroids, all. So the option will be all the above. Next, hormonal diseases may be called functional diseases, deficiency diseases, infectious diseases, all the above. So when it comes to the hormone, the hyposecretion or the hypersecretion both will lead to the disorder. Deficiency, or if it is present in more, both will lead to the disorder, so it can't be a deficiency disease. Then when you come to the infectious disease, this is not an infectious which can spread from one to another, since the hormone secretion is within the person. So it will not spread, hence it is also not infectious. Since these two are wrong, all the above option will be a wrong. When it comes to it is an functional disease, as it alters the functions of the physiological functions of the organ or the tissue in the body by acting on the plasma membrane or the nucleus. So option is functional disease, optional A. Next question, on the basis of chemical nature, hormones are divided into 4 categories. That is, as we have studied the different types of hormones. Next, figure shows location of few endocrine glands. Choose the one that is correct from the given option. So there they have labeled the glands. You can see here. So the A is pineal gland, then the B is the thyroid and the parathyroid. When you come to the C, it is thymus, and you can see the line from here where the D is shown for the pituitary gland and E is hypothalamus, and the option will be C, where A pineal, B thyroid and parathyroid, C thymus, D pituitary and E is hypothalamus. Next, melanocyte stimulating hormone MSH is produced by anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary, pars intermedia of pituitary, parathyroid. As we have studied the 2 lobes of the pituitary gland, where we have mentioned adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis. Neurohypophysis is also known as posterior pituitary, which doesn't secrete any hormone and it stores and helps in release of the hypothalamic hormones that is synthesized in the hypothalamus called oxytocin and the vasopressin. When you come to the adenohypophysis, which is made up of 2 parts, namely pars distalis and pars intermedia. Pars intermedia secretes only one hormone called MSH, whereas the pars distalis secretes 6 hormones. So the option is pars intermedia of pituitary. Next, the gonadotropic hormones are produced in. The gonadotropic hormones are the FSH and LH. These hormones are secreted in which part? Interstitial cells of testis, adrenal cortex, adenohypophysis of pituitary, posterior part of thyroid. So it is interstitial cells of testis are known as Leydig cells. Interstitial cells are known as the Leydig cells, whereas which secretes the male hormones called androgens, whereas adrenal cortex secretes cortisols, cortex region. Then adenohypophysis of pituitary, as we have discussed, adenohypophysis is an anterior lobe which is with the association of the middle lobe called pars intermedia, or adenohypophysis is also having pars distalis, which secretes the 6 hormones as we have studied: growth hormone, prolactin, gonadotrophins like FSH and the LH. Then posterior pituitary, as we already discussed, doesn't secrete any hormone, but it helps in storing and releasing of hormones synthesized in the hypothalamus. Hence, the option will be adenohypophysis of pituitary. In the 6th question, you can see that there is an options called interstitial cells of islets of testis, adrenal cortex, adenohypophysis of pituitary, posterior part of it should be pituitary, not thyroid. And next question, figure shows pituitary gland with parts labeled A, B, C, D and E. Select the option correctly. So here you can observe, as we have already discussed, A is hypothalamus, B is pars intermedia, C is pars nervosa or posterior pituitary, D is pars distalis or anterior pituitary, and E is stalk of the pituitary, we call it as infundibulum. So the option could be the A, hypothalamus, pars intermedia, pars nervosa, pars distalis and E. infundibulum. Next, which of the following is an accumulation and release center of neurohormones? We have discussed the posterior lobe of the pituitary, which helps in storing and releasing a hypothalamic hormones like oxytocin and the vasopressin. Next, which hormone causes dilation of blood? Here it is DIA. Dilation of blood vessels, increased oxygen consumption and glucogenesis. So, which will lead to the hypertension like increased blood pressure, that is adrenaline. Next, diabetes is due to iodine deficiency, hormonal deficiency, sodium ion deficiency, enzyme deficiency. So, diabetes is caused due to absence of insulin. Insulin is an hormone. So, it is hormonal deficiency. Option B. Next is ADH or vasopressin is enzyme that hydrolyzes peptides, hormones secreted by pituitary that promotes reabsorption of water from glomerular filtrate, hormone that promotes glycogenolysis, energy rich compound connected with muscles contraction. So, here as we know, vasopressin is an active vasoconstrictor released during the decrease in the glomerular filtrate rate during the formation of urine, and thus it is secreted by pituitary that promotes reabsorption of water from glomerular filtrate. Option B. Next question, which of the following endocrine gland stores its secretion in the extracellular space before discharging into the blood? As we have studied thyroid gland, where it stores the secretion in the intercellular space and it will be released when it is necessary. The option D. Melatonin is secreted by the pigment, which melatonin is a pigment which is responsible for the circadian cycle, or we call it as diurnal cycle or 24-hour cycle of our body. So, which is secreted by pineal gland, and also it is responsible for the metabolic rate of our body. Adrenaline directly affects SA node, cells of Langerhans, dorsal root of spinal cord, epithelial cells of stomach. So, here SA node is sino-auricular or sino-atrial node. The specialized muscle tissue, or we call it as nodal tissue, which is present at the right atria or right auricle, which helps in contraction of the auricles. So, since adrenal is an emergency hormone or fear, fright, flight hormone, during which the blood pressure will be increased, and this SA node, it is an auto-excitable nodal tissue which will leads to the fast auricular contraction, and thus the adrenaline directly affects on the SA node. Option is A. Next, acromegaly is caused by excess of STH, excess of thyroxine, deficiency of thyroxine, excess of adrenaline. As we have discussed, STH is also known as growth hormone. When it is secreted in more during the children, it will lead to gigantism, or if it is less, it will lead to the dwarfism. Whereas in the adults, if it is secreted more, it will lead to acromegaly. Acro means tip, mega means large. So, tips will grow larger. Abnormal growth of the nose tip or the fingertips etc. we call it as acromegaly. Option A. Next question. Feeling the tremors of an earthquake, a scared resident of 7th floor of a multi-storied building starts climbing down the stairs rapidly. Which hormone initiated this action? Thyroxine, adrenaline, glucagon, gastrin. As we know, if it is a tremors means he is got scared of the earthquake, and in that scarcity they is coming down from the 7th floor. Obviously it will be a emergency hormone called adrenaline. Next, islets of Langerhans secretes adrenaline, ACTH, FSH, insulin. Islet of Langerhans is an endocrine part of pancreas. Endocrine part of pancreas, which has alpha cells, beta cells and the other more cells, but here alpha cell which secretes glucagon and beta cell which secretes insulin. So option is D, insulin. Next question. Which one of the following hormones stimulates the let down or release of milk from the mother's breast when the baby is sucking? Progesterone, oxytocin, prolactin, relaxin. Progesterone is a pregnancy hormone. So which help in maintaining the pregnancy. When you come to oxytocin, it is known as the delivery hormone, and as we discussed, it acts on the smooth muscles present in the uterus or around the mammary glands and leads to the contraction of the mammary glands and let down of the milk. Hence, the oxytocin is the correct option. Prolactin helps in the formation of the or secretion of the milk, whereas relaxin, which secreted in the later stages of the pregnancy, which acts on pubic symphysis, a junction where the pelvic girdle is fused. At the time of the parturition or the delivery, this hormone, which is relaxin, secreted by the placenta, will act on the pubic symphysis and leads to relaxation so that the baby comes out smoothly. Next, occurrence of Leydig cells and their secretion. The Leydig cells are present in between the connective tissue of the testis, that is in between the seminiferous tubules in the testis. If these are the structural and functional units of the testis called seminiferous tubules, in between them there will be a cluster of cells which we call it as Leydig cells or interstitial cells, which help in secretion of testosterone, a male hormone. So the option D, testis and testosterone. Next question. Secretion of progesterone by corpus luteum is initiated by, usually in the ovary during the follicular development from the primary follicle, secondary follicle to tertiary follicle, and the later matured ovarian follicle, which we call it as Graafian follicle. These follicular cells keeps secreting an hormone called estrogen. When from the pituitary gland, LH will be secreted in the large amount, that we call it as LH surge. The Graafian follicle will rupture and releases the secondary oocyte. That time the ruptured Graafian follicle with the remaining cells forms a structure called corpus luteum. This corpus luteum secretes the hormone called progesterone, so which is initiated by the LH. LH is the one which is responsible for the ovulation, the process of release of secondary oocyte from the ruptured Graafian follicle. So the option B. Next question. When both ovaries are removed from rat, which hormone is decreased in blood? As we have discussed, the ovarian hormones are estrogen and progesterone. If the ovaries are itself removed from the rat, then there will be no secretion of any of these two hormones. So in the option we have oxytocin, which is an hormone released by the posterior pituitary, prolactin, which is an hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary, estrogen, which is an ovarian hormone, and gonadotropic releasing factor, which is the factor of the hypothalamus. So the option is C, estrogen. Next, a person is having problem with calcium and phosphorus metabolism in his body. Which one of the following glands may not be functioning properly? So as we have discussed, the hormone which is secreted by the parathyroid will maintain the calcium ion level in our body, and the calcium will be increased in the blood. So that is by the parathyroid. The option A is correct. Next, ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, is secreted by pineal body, anterior lobe of pituitary gland, posterior lobe of pituitary gland, thymus. Pineal body secretes only one hormone called melatonin, whereas anterior lobe of pituitary gland, which is called as pars distalis, secretes the 6 hormone. Among that, one of that is ACTH, and posterior lobe that will store and release oxytocin and the vasopressin, and the thymus, which helps in production of immunity by differentiating the cells of T lymphocytes. So the option is the which one? Anterior lobe of pituitary. Next question, select the right match of endocrine gland and their hormones among the options given below. So we have already discussed about the glands and the hormones, where we can say that pineal body which will secrete an hormone which is called as melatonin. And when you come to the thyroid, so thyroid which secretes the T4 and T3 we have mentioned. This is tetraiodothyronine or triiodothyronine. And then the ovary which secretes the ovary hormones, that is estrogen or progesterone, and adrenal medulla which secretes epinephrine or adrenaline, that is the hormone. So the option D, where A is 2, B 4, C 3 and D 1. Next, match the endocrine glands in list 1 with their deficiency diseases in list 2 and select the correct option. So this also already we have discussed, when the adrenal cortex, which is the cortisol, which leads to the hyposecretion of cortisol, will lead to the Addison's disease, and then the less secretion of thyroid, which will lead to the myxoedema. This myxoedema means swelling of face, toes, like all the digits, etc. Then pituitary gland, particularly the pituitary gland, which we call it as the growth hormone. So that hormone which will lead to dwarfism. And when we come to the parathyroid hormone, which will lead to tetany, that is the tremors in the muscle tissue, that we call it as tetany. So the option D. Thank you. All the best.